everyone, it's Chanel Summers here.
Hello, everybody. Jackie Graves, nice to meet you.
Hey everyone, Megan Secord here, and we are The Collective.
So I'm Jason Miller, and like all of you who are about to be already have been, I'm a Durham College graduate. I graduated quite a bit a while ago. I think it was 2008. I've been a daily newspaper journalist for this September will mark around 12 years since I've been in this business. I've made films as well, a documentary film for TVO, which was released in 2017. So I am a filmmaker as well. So journalism, daily news reporting is kind of my forte. And for the last, I've done some editing. So 2018, I was the bureau chief for the Toronto Star in Calgary. And then I moved back into full-time reporting late 2018 and have been in that position since then. And I'm now moving into a new role as the crime and justice reporter for Peel. It is a critical time, I think, for reporters of color like myself, a Black man especially, to be vocal, but to also be objective. So it's not as if I'm writing a column where I'm allowed to espouse my opinions. It's straight up news reporting. So you could be interviewing the police chief for Toronto or any official. You have to remain on point. You have to remain objective. So there are those challenges where you can't necessarily let your own emotions seep into the work that you're doing. You have to remain objective. You have to remain fair. You have to remain balanced. And especially the position that I hold at the Toronto Star, you have to maintain the credibility of the profession, which is critical considering the brand that I work for. So it's been challenging on many fronts because you might feel a certain kind of way about an issue, but you still have to address it with a certain level of fairness and a sensitivity that comes with the job that we do have, where your personal life cannot, or your personal leanings cannot seep into the work you do. As a Black man, I have a voice from a perspective of what my editors have allowed me to do, which is talk and touch on the issues that matter. So as you said, you've checked in on my profile. So you'd have seen work in relation to kind of the conversation. So to work on issues such as there's just all this conversation about who are allies and who qualifies as an ally and where this term all came from. And so I did a deep dive into that to talk to some academics and some historians and so on and so forth to kind of get a feel of their thoughts on it and to kind of share with the general public what that meant and what being, if you were saying you're an ally, what that would mean. And so that was a good piece, and also did another piece about kind of our blind spots. So the piece was kind of looking into Canada's Black history and why is it that or media and all forms or levels of information sharing is kind of dominated with the south of the border story. So everything about the South is on my Netflix. If I was to turn Netflix on right now and go to that level of programming, I would doubt if you could visibly find a Canadian product. So a lot of the products that 12 Years a Slave, all of these stories are kind of deeply entrenched in the American storyline. And so we wanted to dive into why is it not that we as Canadians don't pay more attention to or don't add more prominence to our own story, and why was happening? And you probably saw in the piece that it was kind of around how Canadians brand themselves, right? It's like this open space, this haven, this place of safety for folks who came here through the Underground Railroad. And so they've used that narrative to kind of gloss over much of what had happened before that and how people are treated. And distinguished woman by the name of Dr. Afua Kupa, who is a professor at Dalhousie University, was one of the people who pointed out to her own employer that the very namesake, Lord Dalhousie, held slaves and discriminated against people, fought against the abolition of slavery, and so on and so forth. So those stories were really good in a sense of, as a reporter, you think you know, but you don't, and you learn as you go, because these people study this every day. My job as a GA is to mix and dabble in a variety of things, day over day. Well, one of the good things is for the company that I work for, they're very thoughtful around these kind of things. And so they always check in to see if you're comfortable heading into certain areas, how you're doing. And so it's been good. And I've done maybe, I guess, 3 stories that are like specific to that. Those 2 analysis pieces is what we call them. And then a more straight up piece about youth in West End kind of Black Creek neighborhood who are kind of trying to meet with police and set the precedents for how communities should be trying to engage with law enforcement. So I did that piece, and then this new initiative came up. So I'm now kind of shifting over to that. So I haven't done as much as I could have or should have been doing. But it's just that because of the new role, I've started to transition. I am working on a piece with my colleague, Noor Javed, in relation to why is it appears as if the Peel Police Service and all the other regional services seem to be kind of in the background while everyone's throwing stones at Toronto Police. And why is it that not until the 62-year-old was shot that we haven't seen this kind of mass protest targeted towards Peel, highlighting point by point kind of the shortfalls in the Peel operation. So that is a piece that we're currently working on. So it's kind of early days yet as it relates to the role. So, I've done a lot of crime and justice work over the years in my prior roles with Post Media. So it's not like strange turf, but it's just knowing the people who are the players and starting to build in those relationships as we move into the next few weeks and months. You folks are on here. Tell your friends. The Star is actually taking action internally to address some of the shortfalls as it relates to our hiring practices and people of color. And so they've created a summer program. And I think it's about 5 or so jobs that are available to people of color. So tell your friends who are people of color to look into that. We consume a lot of this content across all platforms. It's on your Instagram. You can't ignore it on Twitter, and it's on your television screens if you were to consume as much news as I do. So it does impact your thoughts. You cannot ignore it. And the fact that you're living through it and knowing that as a Black man, I could drive down the street and have an encounter with police. So it's like, I am one of the central figures in the very story that I'm writing about, right? So, it's come with like a mix of emotions. And so at the end of the day, it does take a little bit of time, I must be honest, to kind of get back into some level of normal. And it never really does, because the folks, my brother's here, his kids are here. So the conversation continues on. So it's never like we ever shut off, right? So it's like you go into work mode, you're dealing with it, and then you come out of work and you're still dealing with it. Because if I call my mom, she's like, have you seen what's going on? And it's like, as a reporter too, everyone wants to talk about the news. I'm like, can we talk about food or like having a drink or something? So I try to just put myself in a space where I don't necessarily have to take much of it after I'm done working. But you just can't escape it. And you can't fight it. So you just have to stand up to the challenge and do what you have to do. And as you say, like my stepmom would always say, is like, Dr. King didn't run away from the challenge, and he was putting his life on the line. You're just writing stories, so there's not much to complain about. You get to be a part of the conversation. As I say, the work that we do in media lives on. Someone will always be able to find it somewhere, right? So you do leave a legacy as part of that narrative that challenged these norms, if we want to call them that, or what has become kind of a norm in our society, and to say this isn't how things should be. So you do feel some sense of pride for being a part of that. Our industry has been facing an existential kind of crisis in since the Trump era. And with his 70 plus million followers, he's been able to essentially set booby traps all over our industry. His idea of fake news hasn't benefited us at all. And you see it at the doorsteps. You go out now to interview people, they're very skeptical about whether or not you are actually a professional journalist. They feel you're just some other blogger. You have to show proof of who you are, which is fine. That's something I think people should ask for regardless. But it comes with this level of trepidation that is hard to get through. So you find that the job is a little bit more challenging. what I want people to understand and to know is that the quality of journalism that is done at the Star, the Globe and Mail, right down to even the Toronto Sun. I mean, those are the people who gave me the start in the business. So, I can't spend my time trying to kick them around the room. Any entity, CP24, all of these agencies, it is critical to our democracy. And I don't think people understand how much the Star has this banner program that we call Get Action, and it was created by one of our editors way back about a decade plus ago. And it's basically our investigations and the work we're doing. The Bad Doctors Project that is highlighting how doctors are overbilling our system, how doctors who don't even have proper training and certification, who have been disbarred or thrown out of their profession by the regulatory body, are still trying to practice. You talk about the Panama Papers and papers, the stuff we've done about bankruptcies in Canada and how rich people take advantage of our tax system. You talk about the work that we did out west in trucking, just as simple as our recent climate project, just to stay on those issues. What happens if we were to then turn the light off? Get anyone in Canada, of all the 35 or so million of us here, get everyone in front and ask them this question and say, if we were to shut off all of those challenges to these agencies and these groups and these people who then can then function as they please and leave it up to the average everyday, and no disrespect to anyone, but the average everyday blogger who has an opinion but doesn't have the grit or the wherewithal to attack these entities the way they should go at it, what will then happen? So you say that the power plant that the Liberals blow up, that will just happen and that billions of dollars will just go unnoticed? Or a person who was in Ottawa who wants to be a whistleblower doesn't have an outlet to do that. So the people who are carrying out these misappropriation of funds or improper behavior can continue that. That's a society we'll have if media declines to a point where it just doesn't have the same oomph that it's had over the years. I think one of the critical pieces is anyone or people, group, community that you cover, you need to have quality face time with them. You need to ask the uncomfortable questions, but you need to also put yourself in an uncomfortable position to say, I'm not an expert in knowing how to use First Nation terminology. Do I say tobacco, or do I use the actual First Nation name for this thing or Indigenous name for this thing? And so it shows a level of respect when you try your best to open up those doors to people to say, hey, I want to make sure that this story is the best representation of you, your people, and your community. And the same thing applies. You might go around someone, say, for example, you're interviewing a Black person at a protest, and they might have given you their name, and you do an interview and then you walk away. He's like, I have this name because that's a critical piece. You want to make sure your editor knows that I have this name, I have this great interview, and that person comes up to you and say, man, I changed my mind, please don't use my name. But in sensitive situations such as a protest, when you're talking to someone, they might not want their employer to know they're there. They might not want their own wife or husband or partner to know, they're there. Like, I mean, it's all these things that play into when people are putting themselves on the line to represent something. It doesn't necessarily mean they want to be the face of it or be exposed doing it. So it's always a case by case. But one thing is you need to know your subject inside out. So always, no matter if you have 5 minutes, try to dive into as much reading as you can about where you're going, who you're going to be talking to, what they've done in relation to the subject matter you're going to be discussing. So you're on an educated level when you sit down or when you talk with them or you meet with them. I often use this as a hey, I'm here and I'm serious kind of a moment. When you cover those issues, especially people of color, you have to be especially cautious and thoughtful about what might create harm to someone and what might be to someone or a group's benefit.